20s. We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hey, welcome along. Yesterday we carried earth-shattering breaking news about who'd been appointed Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and the end of Baroness Evans' cabinet career for spilling coffee over my guest, Samantha Smith, sitting right here with us. Threw coffee all over Samantha, and it's tough to say goodbye to her. But as I always say, politicians only matter if politics matters. If all the important decisions are being made elsewhere, then even some big-shot baroness might just as well be hurling the macchiatos around at a Costa on the M6. We are in... Oh, look, there is a Costa on the M6. That's very literal. That's how we do things. And now I'm suddenly got a tremendous craving for a macchiato. But we are in crisis. And the crisis is getting worse, and the, quote, personalities, I use the term very loosely, and the palace intrigue are only important if they are going to end that crisis. We have lots of matters in the hour. And, of course, the most important part of the show, that's you. Give it your best. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at gbnews. It's all coming your way after Polly Middlehurst with the latest headlines.
Mark, thank you. Good evening to you. The new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, says she's going to announce a package of support to help people deal with rising energy prices tomorrow. During her first Prime Minister's questions today, she refused to introduce a windfall tax on energy companies, saying it would discourage UK investment. But the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, accused her of protecting company profits instead of helping families.
Is she really telling us that she's going to leave these vast excess profits on the table and make working people foot the bill for decades to come?
I, as Prime Minister, will take immediate action to help people with the cost of their energy bills, and I will be making an announcement to this House on that tomorrow.
And the Queen has postponed a meeting of the Privy Council after being advised by her doctors to rest. Buckingham Palace says the latest advice does not involve a hospital stay, and the meeting, which was supposed to take place tonight, will be rescheduled. Her Majesty remains at Balmoral Castle, where she was pictured yesterday inviting Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. 10 animal rights protesters have been arrested after vandalising Parliament with white paint. They call themselves Animal Rebellion and they want Liz Truss to take action on dairy farming. The group says it's worsening climate change. Some of the activists also glued themselves to the pavement outside the Palace of Westminster shortly before Prime Minister's questions. Royal Mail workers have voted to stage a further 48-hour strike at the end of this month. The walkout follows other planned industrial action scheduled to take place tomorrow. 115,000 members of the Communication Workers Union plan to walk out over an offer of a 2% pay rise. The union warns there could be more action if the deadlock isn't broken. And movie theatre chain Cineworld has filed for bankruptcy in the United States as they seek time to restructure. The company has filed for Chapter 11, which involves Cineworld's US, UK and Jersey businesses. They hope to emerge from bankruptcy in the first quarter of next year. And shares are expected to continue trading on the London Stock Exchange. President Biden has hosted a ceremony unveiling portraits of former President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama. The painting will be hung in the White House following a long-held tradition. Usually a former president returns for the unveiling of his successor's tenure, but there was no ceremony held for the Obamas while President Trump was in office. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News and you're up to date. Now it's time for Mark Steyn.
We really do need an art critic in the studio to have a go at those presidential portraits there. Thank you very much, Polly. It's actually pretty serious news about the Queen postponing the Privy Council meeting. I'm not actually sure how official those cabinet appointments are until they have actually kissed hands with Her Majesty at the Privy Council. So I don't know how long you can be Home Secretary without the Privy Council meeting. It's very, maybe we need, I'm not in favour of making the Prince of Wales semi-regent or anything, but maybe we need a Governor-General for the United Kingdom, just as the Queen has one for Canada, Australia, Belize, Papua New Guinea, Tuvalu and all the rest. We need to start thinking about some of these things. It's not pleasant to have to do it, but when you're getting Privy Council meetings postponed, it is pretty necessary. On the eve of the Great War, the British Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, this is him, I think, that's him on the left there. Not sure who the guy on the right is. I think that's Sir Keir Starmer when he was Director of Public Prosecutions. Anyway, the Foreign Secretary, being very male, pale and stale, as Sir Keir does very well. Anyway, the Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, famously observed, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." That was August the 3rd, 1914, 108 years later. The lamps are again going out all over Europe. Here is the famous Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Oh, no, I'm sorry, my mistake. That was the Brandenburg Gate before the lamps went out. Here's how it looks now. The lamps are out at the Brandenburg Gate. The lamps are out on illuminated advertising billboards across Germany. The radiators in the lobbies and corridors of all Germany's public buildings have been turned off, and in the places where the radiators are still permitted, such as the waiting rooms at railway stations, the maximum permitted temperature is 19 Celsius, that is 66 Fahrenheit. That can get a little chilly in some of those drafty, older waiting rooms. Worse is to come. Here is the so-called President of Europe, Cruella von der Leyen, announcing that it is time once more to flatten the curve. Flattening the curve is back. No, not the COVID, not Omicron or monkeypox or whatever, but the curve flattening that worked so well for a couple of weeks in March 2020 is now to be applied to Hans and Jean-Pierre and Freya and Marie-Claude should they wish to watch a primetime telly show or use a radiator at breakfast. Take it away, Cruella.
This is what is expensive, because in these peak demands, the expensive gas comes into the market. So what we have to do is flatten the curve and avoid the peak demands. We will propose a mandatory target for reducing electricity use at peak hours, and we will work very closely with the member states to achieve this.
Aha! Mandatory targets for reducing electricity at peak hours, just to flatten the curve. And just like last time round, in order to flatten the curve, we have to flatten you. 70% of pubs could shut down due to soaring energy costs. The pints are going out all over Europe. Will we be getting lit up again in our lifetime? Well, in August 1914, Europe's great empires went to war. Are we at war now? No. Officially, only Ukraine and Russia are at war. As Neville Chamberlain put it, that's a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing. Though if you go on the telly to pontificate, you have to bluff your way through it and throw in stuff like the Donbass and all the rest of it. So how's it going? Who's winning? Ukraine or Russia? Dunno, it's hard to say. But if we can't say who's winning, one thing can be said for certain. It's Europe that's losing. In fact, it's you that's losing. The Nord Stream 1 pipeline is having some quote-unquote technical issues, according to its maintenance staff in the Kremlin. Oh, you don't say technical issues. How long are those going to go on for? Oh, it's hard to know. If you're an EU Prime Minister, just leave your name with the girl at the desk and we'll get back to you in a week or three, maybe the day before your confidence vote in Parliament. Have you seen these demonstrations on the streets of Prague? What are they so steamed about? Colonialism? Transgender bathrooms? No. Energy. Inflation and membership of the EU and NATO. 70,000 protesters in Prague. That's not bad for a city of 1.3 million. What do you reckon it will be if the Kremlin maintenance crew decides to tighten the spigot a little more? 100,000? 250,000 in the streets of Prague? Whatever interest Putin still has in Ukraine's territory or government or anything else, he has no great interest in ending the war because he is teaching an entire continent a very useful lesson. You pick a fight with me, you freeze, you sit in the dark, your granny turns blue and dies. If you were Putin, wouldn't you enjoy teaching that lesson to these Euro posers? The interesting question is, why are the continent's leaders so keen to play along and put out those lights? To go back to Sir Edward Grey, are they planning on relighting the lamps in our lifetime? Or as with COVID, do we do the old 2 weeks to flatten the curve thing and we never quite go back to normal? Not on freedom of speech, freedom of movement and many other core Western liberties. On August 3rd, 1914, Sir Edward Grey was being rather pessimistic. Everyone said the war would be over by Christmas. 4 months to flatten the Hun. It took 4 years. But with COVID, with Ukraine, with climate, you get the feeling our god-awful ruling classes are teaching us how to live smaller, ruder, meaner, shrunken lives in perpetuity. And there's no let-up. Headline from The Guardian: Dutch city becomes world's first to ban meat adverts in public. The city in question is Haarlem. That's just west of Amsterdam. We'll talk about that in a minute with our favourite Hilversum milkmaid, Eva Vlaardingerbroek. But what's fascinating to me here is very basic. Why would you do this? First the COVID, then the lockdown, then the tanked economy and 1970s inflation and energy costs that would once have been unimaginable, €1,000 per megawatt hour. And this municipal council thinks, hey, you know what our citizens could use right now? A political class that's wrecked everything in sight, now moving on to tell them what they can and can't eat. This isn't just crazy foreigners, it's crazy Brits too, as we reported last month. This is the Independent headline, the pioneering British town which has committed to veganism. That would be Haywards Heath in West Sussex, the first town in Europe to go vegan officially. Why on earth would that be a priority at a time when there's double-digit inflation, energy bills predicted to climb to just shy of 5 figures early in the new year, an entirely moribund health service under which you can call 999 and wait 24 hours for an ambulance, a constabulary that solves a statistically insignificant number of crimes but can still send 5 officers round if you misgender someone on Twitter, a border force that exists to shepherd 1,000 military-age young men a night onto England's shores and put them up at the Holiday Inn at your expense? Why is the destruction of 12,000 years of agriculture suddenly the answer to all this? I mean, even without the municipal councils of Haarlem and Haywards Heath putting their thumbs on the scale, you're going to be eating a lot less anyway. Here is the German finance minister, the German economics minister, tap dancing around a perfectly straightforward question about whether he expects a wave of bankruptcies this winter. I'll translate as Herr Robert Habeck flounders along.
Das tue ich nicht.
No, I don't. I can imagine that certain industries and businesses may stop trading, though not going bankrupt. But I mean, I personally can no longer go to the bakery and buy breakfast in peace in the morning. But I know from my old life that bread from the bakery is about twice as expensive as bread from the discount supermarkets. But when the prices rise relatively, as they are going to, the difference in price will rise exponentially. And we see it already everywhere in businesses that are reliant on people spending small amounts day to day, like florists, organic counters, bakeries, etc. They will have a real problem when there is a general reluctance to spend money. They won't go bankrupt automatically, but they might stop trading. Unquote. So you won't be bankrupt, you just won't be trading. You won't be selling anything. You won't be deriving any income from your labours. But don't worry, at least you're not going bankrupt. Got it. Let me know what you reckon. GBViews at gbnews.uk. As I said, everyone's favourite milk maiden of Hilversum is back with us. Eva Vlaardingerbroek. Why are they doing this to us, Eva?
Well, it's very clear that these people are playing a game of words. So you see that with this German minister who is saying, oh, you're not actually going to be bankrupt. You're just not going to be able to buy anything or sell anything. We see it with Ursula von der Leyen. It is flatten the curve. You know, she's using these words as a means of psychological warfare. They're doing it because they know that this type of confusion and this type of rhetoric that they keep on hammering into our brains has worked during COVID before to basically have us give up all of our rights. And they're not willing to let that go. They're going to use their narrative to all get us to play along with them and to give up our rights and to do exactly what they say. That is what flatten the curve means. They're doing it on purpose. And even we, you know, play along with that to a certain extent. When we talk about a European energy crisis, for example, we don't have an energy crisis in Europe. We have a crisis of leadership. We have people who are making conscious choices that are putting their own population in these dire circumstances. And that is what is happening here. It is not an energy crisis that's coming out of thin air. It's not a pandemic that we couldn't have solved any other way. It is a conscious decision from our elites to keep us under their thumb.
Well, how will the people put up with that? Germany is supposed to be the economic powerhouse of continental Europe. And yet they're now saying, oh, well, if you go into the town hall in Germany because you got an appointment with somebody, you're going to have to sit in a drafty lobby because we can't have any radiators on in public buildings in Germany. Why the hell aren't people saying, well, wait a minute, we're on the G7, we're one of the most wealthy nations on the planet. Well, how the hell did this happen? You did it to us. Why should we have to suffer for it?
Well, that's the very first step, is that people need to realize that this is something that they did to us. As long as that doesn't happen, as long as people are just going to become more and more desperate, which is totally understandable, let's face it, this is going to cause a huge economic collapse if nothing changes. Not just ordinary people that are not going to be able to pay for their energy bills, pubs that you just mentioned, any other type of small to medium businesses are going to absolutely be crushed by these new energy prices. So that is going to cause massive economic destruction. And then what? What are people going to do? That's the multi-million-dollar question. Are they going to say, listen, we are put into this situation not because of external factors, but because of the choices made by our leaders, by people who we didn't ever elect, someone like Ursula von der Leyen, for example? Or are they going to be so desperate that they're going to beg the same people who put us in this situation for help? I really hope it won't be the latter option.
Well, I had an American viewer who sent me an email or whatever it was the other week, and he said people will turn to the state before they turn on the state. In other words, before they say, Ursula von der Leyen, you prime ministers here, there and everywhere, you did this to us, screw you, we want an end to this. They will say, oh, yes, you did this to us, but could we just like have a bigger check to get us through the winter? That's more, Liz Truss, to a certain extent, Liz Truss, who's been running as the reincarnation of Mrs. Thatcher, is now saying that what she needs to do is come up with a big pile of money that the government doesn't have and give it to people to get them through Christmas.
Right. No, we need to absolutely, first of all, sieve through their rhetoric. We need to sieve through their narrative before we can start to really see what they're doing here. So we need to stop saying that there is an energy crisis. We need to say, no, you guys have done this to us. We need to stop saying things like, oh, this is a COVID vaccine. No, it's an mRNA shot that was experimental. We need to stop saying this is a COVID passport. No, it's a digital identity that is the first step towards a social crediting system. And you all want this. The people who rule us, the people that we didn't elect, who are in the pockets of this World Economic Forum. I know that even your new prime minister is someone who's a member of the World Economic Forum. So that doesn't give me very much hope for your future either. We need to see that. And then we need to say, listen, I am not going to ask you for help for a situation that you created. That's the only way that we will ever get out of this. But I agree with your American viewer that this is definitely something that we have a lot of work still to do to be able to get a majority of the population to see that, because these people control the narrative. They still do, and it's going to become a very dark and a very cold winter because of that.
Do you think, when you look at those crowds on the streets of Prague, do you think actually it's Middle Europa and the Warsaw Pact countries that are going to get mad about this before the complacent West does?
Most likely, because, for example, my country, the Netherlands, we have the largest natural gas field under our soil in the entire European Union, but my government's not touching it because they say, obviously, that fossil fuel is bad, but also because it would cause cracks in the houses of the people living up north, and they suddenly don't have money to give them compensation. So instead, we're all paying for it. Well, the Hungarians are doing it a little bit smarter. They said, hey, we're actually going to open 2 nuclear plants. You know, so see what I'm saying here? It's all created. It's all manufactured. So as long as people don't see that, then nothing is going to change. But I feel like, again, Eastern Europe is doing it better in that sense than the West.
You're quite correct to say we should stop calling it an energy crisis. It's a crisis of public policy decisions made by all those buffoons who were at COP26, all agreeing that the most pressing issue in our world is sea levels in the Maldives in the 22nd century, even as their citizens freeze. And by the way, for you citizens, you do need to turn on the state rather than turn to the state, because they did this to you. They did this to you, and it's their plan that it's going to stay like this. If you like the old idea of central heating and personal motorised transportation, forget it. That's like a mid-20th century peak. They want this new world to be permanent. Thank you very much, Eva. It is always good to see you, and we'll see you again in a couple of days. Looking forward to it. We're going to get to your thoughts next. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Here on the Mark Steyn Show, we like to do the awkward subjects out in the open. Whether it's the unexplained phenomenon of excess deaths running at over 1,000 a week in England and Wales all spring and summer, or whether it's 12-year-old English girls getting picked up in Oldham police station itself by Pakistani Muslim rape gangs and getting gang raped all night at the Palace of Westminster. They occasionally talk about these subjects. Oh, look at that. They're fascinated by these subjects only. They only talk about them when there's a big distraction like the unlikely phenomenon of Liz Truss fever to ensure that nobody even notices these debates took place. National Sweep It Under the Carpet Week continues in the House of Commons. We're going to get to it with Vikki Spit and Samantha Smith in just a moment. Don't touch that dial. You never know what you'll find on some of these other channels. We're coming right back.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
GB News is the People's Channel, so let's channel what the people are saying. Are you worried about going bankrupt this winter? Ross says, no, I'm loaded, thanks. That's great news. 10 minutes after the show, we're all going to meet round at Ross's pad and snaffle his caviar. He's a very generous host. Glad to know you're loaded, Ross. Norman isn't worried either. After I have cleaned with a wet towel and worn a jumper, I should be okay. You're doing it wrong. If your towel is actually wet, you are wasting precious resources. Thames Water advise people, instead of taking showers, to wash themselves with a damp cloth. Nobody said anything about a wet towel. That is way too luxurious. The water system can't take you using a wet towel. It's just a damp cloth, just a slightly moistened cloth. If you live in the Thames water catchment area, you may already have noticed that people are getting a bit ripe, but at least they're doing their part. Sarah says, I'm more worried that Liz Truss refuses to announce a windfall tax and how we're going to pay back over £100 billion. Yeah, there's no really... It's not, the way the accounts work nowadays at Her Majesty's Treasury, there isn't really £100 billion. We've spent all the billions, hundreds of billions of pounds that could be spent. We've spent all the money that the United Kingdom is ever going to have in the 21st century. So we're basically spending 22nd century money now. Thank you for that. We're going to have Stump the Steyn coming up in just a bit. As we mentioned yesterday, the eminent BBC broadcaster, Dr. Matthew Sweet, is trying to get this show taken off the air. Here's what he's been tweeting. What can be done about GB News and its addiction to misinformation porn like Mark Steyn show? And it turns out what Dr. Sweet would like done about it is for Ofcom to ban the show. Quote, here's another quote from Dr. Sweet. Perhaps we could think of it as the journalistic equivalent of the raw sewage being spilled on British beaches. Maybe Ofcom will block up the pipe. Well, yesterday we invited Dr. Matthew Sweet to come on the show and point out what he calls our misinformation. But he didn't get back to us. So we renewed the invitation today, and again he hasn't responded. He seems an influential and important person, so he may very well succeed in taking this show off the air. But the point to remember is that it won't be me he's shutting up, but a whole lot of people and a whole lot of subjects that the respectable outlets, the ones that hire Dr. Sweet, the respectable outlets steer well clear of these subjects. Joe Ward, who's been on this show, and who lost his dad to the AstraZeneca vaccine. And before Dr. Sweet goes, oh no, misinformation, that's official. That's been recognised by Her Majesty's government that the vaccine killed Joe's dad. He tweeted this out. My dad's death is not in misinformation. You're a horrible person, Dr. Matthew Sweet. Thank you to GB News and VIB UK, that's Vaccine Injured and Bereaved UK, that's a terrific support group. Thank you GB News and VIB UK for highlighting support for Vaccine Injured and Bereaved. Idiots like this Dr. Matthew Sweet cause huge trauma to us. I don't doubt it, Joe. For a sophisticated fellow who's on Radio 3 and Radio 4, he seems to lack a certain imaginative capacity to be able to sympathise with you losing your father and then having the organs of the state, including the entire culture of the state, deny, including Dr. Matthew Sweet, deny your bereavement. But we renew our invitation for him to come on and make his case, because we believe in free speech rather than sicking Ofcom on anyone you disagree with and getting them banned, which is apparently now the Liberal position on these matters. Vikki Spit has appeared on this show many times in recent months, and we always love to see her. And just a few weeks back, Vikki became the first person in the United Kingdom to receive compensation for the death of her loved one to the COVID vaccines. The other day, Xeon, the great love of Vikki Spit's life, there they are. Vikki played, they had a band, Vikki played bass in the band. Xeon was honoured by the Order of St. John for donating his organs to be used to help others after his death. He died young, so he donated them a good 3-4 decades before he expected to be donating them. Nevertheless, the sovereign of the Order of St. John is, let me just check this, I don't want to get it wrong in case Dr. Sweet is watching. Oh yeah, Her Majesty the Queen. So that's about as official as it gets. And if you look at Xeon's award here, you will see that it's signed there at the bottom, Richard. That's the Grand Prior of the Order, His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester. And yet, despite having an award from the Duke of Gloucester, Xeon continues to be insulted in death by the control freaks of social media. Vikki is back with us now. Vikki, it's great to see you. You must at times be feeling you're living in some kind of schizophrenic world. On the one hand, you're accepting an award on Xeon's behalf, signed by the Duke of Gloucester, and at the same time, Facebook and Twitter's kicked you off completely because you're peddling misinformation. How do you reconcile these two crazy aspects of your world?
I spend a lot of time trying to reconcile that. It is extremely difficult to come to terms with the fact that Z in death saved 3 people's lives. His kidneys and his liver went to 3 individuals, and I really hope that they now have a much happier life and a much better outlook, and their families don't have to go through what I've gone through. Ultimately, for everyone who has to donate their organs or the organs of their loved ones, that's what you're thinking at the time, is I don't want anyone else to go through what I'm going through. If we can save someone else from experiencing this, we'll do it. And for then Twitter to tell me I'm misinformation, that talking about Z being killed by the AstraZeneca vaccine is misinformation, I don't really know how they could be much more insulting, honestly.
No, I think that's true. And what's weird about this even is that the AstraZeneca vaccine is gone. The government has said it's not going to be reordering it. The government seems to be saying on the quiet that, yeah, there's something about this thing, we don't want any more of it, but they're not willing to actually explain publicly why they're not reordering the vaccine.
Well, they've given it a new name. It's Covax now, and they are using it again under a different brand name.
So let me tell you though, let me ask you though, how that actually works, because what is Twitter's position? Twitter seems to say, you know, you can't say anything that's mildly critical of the vaccines, and somehow that elides into saying you can't actually go and talk about Xeon. There's your fabulous dog from the mean streets of Cairo. It's good to see. Actually, I'll tell you, I'll ask you this, Vikki. I never really believed in the concept of emotional support animals until I saw you with your dogs, because you said to me that basically it was your dogs who'd got you through this last year and a half.
They absolutely did. Without them, I wouldn't have had a reason to get out of bed in the morning. They make me, literally physically make me get out of bed, make me look after them, and having other things rely on you gives you a reason to keep going. And obviously that's grown now. We're working with Viv UK. There are hundreds of families, hundreds of people who do rely on us to campaign on their behalf. So yeah, dogs are a stepping stone to that kind of thing, I think.
Are you surprised by the likes of Matthew Sweet, who is a big respected broadcaster with the BBC, and he seems to think that even giving publicity to people who've been bereaved or injured by the vaccines is misinformation?
I think it's so short-sighted and so malicious and spiteful, and I don't know if I can say this, but I think it's arse covering. I think all of these people from the mainstream media who take that sort of attitude, they're arse covering. They don't want to be seen as doing anything that might imply that they've put a toe over the, oh, maybe the vaccines aren't completely wonderful line. So they backpedal in the opposite direction. You know, it's just one extreme to the other. There's no openness of discussion about the vaccine. There's no comprehension. Well, actually, they have injured some people. They have killed some people. We can't have an open discussion about it. We just have to go, well, your partner died from the vaccine, therefore you are an anti-vaxxer and you are crazy. And it's just incomprehensible. It really is. I still, after all these months, I still struggle to get my head around it.
Yeah, because you basically are doubly injured. You've lost a guy you had a reasonable expectation of being able to spend the next 30 or 40 years with, and at the same time, when you seek to express honestly some truths about him. As you said, he's in death, he's helped others, he's given his body parts away so that others can live, and that ought to be a happy story. That ought to be a story that you can take pride in. And instead, like no-name guys on Twitter and big-name guys like this Matthew Sweet are somehow denigrating and diminishing your loss, that it's not good for the fairy tale that these vaccines are super wonderful.
Exactly. I mean, people are becoming aware of it as well. It doesn't do anything for vaccine confidence if they do a little bit of research and find out, no, those vaccines have actually injured people, and they see how we are being treated by the mainstream media, which is all endorsed by the government, of course, and by Ofcom. And it's got to raise eyebrows. And as you know, the vaccine uptake for boosters has been very low, and I think this is why.
At Zion's inquest, there was a very interesting factoid that emerged, which is that paramedics were not actually provided with any information about possible vaccine side effects until really just a few months ago, and that at the time Zion, for example, went into hospital, insofar as they could find out anything about vaccine side effects, they had to do it by Googling on the internet.
Four paramedics were asked at what point they were given any guidelines with regards to adverse reactions to vaccines, and they all said July 2022. The first time I thought I'd misheard. I thought that can't possibly be right, but it was clarified, and yes, there was no official guidelines for paramedics, people who are the first people you see in the case of an emergency, like with Z, and they had no clue what they were looking out for. And they all said that all their information came from what they saw in the news and what they saw in the media. And at the time when this happened to Z, there were very vague comments about blood clots, and the UK's media were all saying, oh, it's not true, there's no link, there's nothing to do with the vaccines.
No.
This is life-saving
that's
information.
July 20... Yeah, July 22, that's just 6, 7, 8 weeks ago, by which time you and I had been talking about this issue on this show for 3 months. They had a debate in Parliament yesterday. What did you make of that?
Well, I thought the MPs who were pro-reforming the VDPS made some excellent points. As they pointed out, this is meant to offer comfort and support to people in times of great crisis. That's not really very helpful if it comes 18 months after the event. That's an extremely good point. The fact the 60% criteria is extremely terrible. I mean, how can you imagine, if you get 30% disabled, that's life-changing, especially if you got 30% disabled through doing what the government told you would prevent you from causing harm to others, and you did it in good faith, and you're left disabled to a large extent for the rest of your life, and you're not entitled to a penny. That's not right. And as they point out, we're part of the, I can't remember what it's called, but there's an international organisation which the UK is part of, which provides vaccine damage support to others in other countries. And I think they said that in those countries, it's approximately 3 times the value of the VDPS payout. So we will give better aid to other people in other countries who have damaged by the vaccine. But in this country, we just try and shut them up, give them a token amount.
Well, right. And they're slow-walking it, as was pointed out in Parliament. They've approved 13 payments so far. That's basically that's less than 1 a month since the time people like you started making their applications. So at this rate, it's going to take decades for the thousands who have, actually that's just the bereaved, but for the hundreds of thousands who are injured to receive any compensation. It's going to be, it's absolutely disgraceful. Whoever the new who's the new health? Oh, it's the Deputy Prime Minister. So perhaps the new Health Secretary, Therese Coffey, would like to accelerate this process a little. Thank you very much, Vikki. It is always great to see you. You are an inspiration. You've had your pathetic cheque from the government, but you're still working with your fellow vaccine injured and bereaved, and you are a credit to the nation, whatever these buffoons on Twitter say. And Twitter, give her account back. I'd like to read something decent on Twitter, and Vikki is the one I want to read. Samantha Smith was here yesterday, and we were supposed to be talking about the House of Commons debate on the industrial-scale child gang rape taking place in Telford in Shropshire, but it was one of those political nights. The PM was reshuffling the captain's table on the Titanic, and so things like the eviction of Baroness Evans from Cabinet loomed larger than they should. So we didn't really give the industrial-scale rape of little English girls by networks of politically connected members of the Pakistani community the attention it deserves. We will do. Samantha's back with us. Stick around. Samantha Smith up next.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
We spoke yesterday about the shameful debate, if you can even call it that, in the House of Commons about the Telford, quote, inquiry. Just 9 MPs were present in the chamber, 6 Tories and 3 from the multitude of opposition parties, and they weren't exactly keen to speak candidly about who's doing all the raping of little English girls in Shropshire and up and down this land. Samantha Smith, who is one of the victims, both of the persons in Telford who are partial to this sort of thing, and of the police and political indifference to what's being done to her. Samantha's back with us today. Samantha, do you feel that debate accomplished anything?
Well, I think that it's a very important debate that should have been had when every political correspondent and news channel wasn't focused on 10 Downing Street and Liz Truss's appointment. I want to give absolute credit to Lucy Allen, the MP for Telford, who has tirelessly campaigned for justice for victims, which couldn't be worlds apart from Telford and Wrekin Council, the Labour-led council, and her fellow MP Mark Pritchard for the Wrekin. But having a debate at 6:56 p.m. with 9 MPs in attendance on a Monday night when there's late voting anyway, and in the period where a new PM is getting appointed, practically guarantees that nobody's going to be tuning in and very few people are going to be attending. Yeah, this is as basic as it gets, though, because you know, the numbers are horrifying. Telford isn't that big a town, and if over 1,000 girls can be the victims of these gangs in a place at Telford, you can't even begin to imagine the numbers that Birmingham or Manchester would be able to rack up if there was honest investigation of what's going on there.
what in the end is the obstacle to actually lancing this boil on England and dealing with the issue?
Quite simply, it's institutional blindness. As you said, Telford is a very small town. It's been led by Labour leader Councillor Sean Davis since 2016, and yet they tried for years to block an independent inquiry. They said that it would cost too much money, that a national inquiry into child abuse in general would suffice, and that there simply wasn't a big enough issue with CSE in Telford to warrant an inquiry. It's the fact that local Labour leaders, that police services, social workers, schools, GPs, sexual health clinics spent decades turning a blind eye to little girls who were being systematically raped, groomed, abused and even murdered in some cases by predominantly Pakistani men. These are children being raped by adult men, and those in positions of power couldn't care less, because white working class girls predominantly are not seen as newsworthy, as worthy of justice, of support or of being believed. And this went on for decades.
Well, it's this hierarchy of victimhood that you seem to have in an identity group society, where, you know, if you're on the trans issue, for example, lesbians and feminists are being told, no, you come lower on the totem pole in the hierarchy of victimhood. And basically, it seems to be that if you're English working class girls, and the guys on the other end of the deal are, as you say, overwhelmingly Pakistani men, then you just institutionally don't rank as a victim group.
So Telford is quite a unique case in the fact that there were victims who were not just white working class girls. So there were girls that were African or Asian, but there is a very clear demographic that is largely falling victim to grooming gangs, and that's white working class girls, many of them in care, many of them under social services like I was, many who are vulnerable, who don't have adults that are looking out for them and that are looking out for their safety. And that's why these men are able to quite literally pick up girls from the police station after they've gone to report their rape, because those in positions of power turned a blind eye. It's much easier to blame the victims, to brand them child prostitutes or white slags, than to actually prosecute those responsible.
But you know, this all burst out into public. It's a decade ago now when the truth about Rotherham emerged, and it's got to be, I think, whatever it is now, 7-8 years since I first went to Rotherham and talked to these girls. And what's incredible to me is that after it all comes out, and after the shame of Rotherham headlines on the Daily Mirror for a day or two, someone like you were then basically halfway through being abused, and the abuse still goes on, in your case, for years after it's made national headlines.
And this all comes down to the institutional blindness that I was talking about a moment ago. It's those in positions of power trying to sweep it under the rug and move on. You know, the leader of Telford Region Council, and I'm a big fan of naming and shaming, Councillor Sean Davis, who's been in power since 2016, he's been a councillor for 15 years, and is now the Labour leader of the Local Government Association, which is very ironic considering he oversaw years. He is, yes.
So he does nothing. He does nothing about child gang rape in his town, and the Labour Party or whoever it is rewards him by making him the head of the Local Government Association.
See, he when everything came out about CSE and with the Telford independent inquiry into CSE, he liked to stress the fact that this happened 30 years ago, and he was only 3 years old at the time.
Wait a minute. How you aren't 30, so how the hell did it happen 30 years ago?
Exactly. They like to pretend that it's a crime of the past, that mistakes have been made and lessons have been learned, that this isn't something that goes on in towns like Telford anymore. But I can testify to the fact that this was going on long after they say that it stopped. And whether or not Councillor Sean Davis wants to pretend that this is a crime of the past is irrelevant, because I can say that girls in towns and cities across the country are still being raped, abused and groomed on a daily basis.
Well, I think we had a statement from the councils. I don't know what it is. Let me see if I can find it. It's not impressive.
Oh, well, I can tell you what it is.
What is-
They
Have you
said
seen it?
in a very brief statement, which they issued, I believe, the day after the publication of the report. Councillor Sean Davis didn't put out a personal statement.
Oh, yeah,
He's usually very keen to stick his name on the end of anything to do with the council, but this came from the council in general. There was no name attributed to it. They said that the council was already carrying out many of the recommendations put in the report, that they apologised for the pain and the suffering of the victims without acknowledging any responsibility for decades' worth of incompetence and ignorance on the part of
Well,
Telford
they've offered their thanks to, I'm just saying, together with Shropshire Council and the police, that's the useless West Mercia Constabulary, they should be disbanded, actually, because what they've done is, when you look at the reason they disbanded the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and then you look at what West Mercia did to these poor abused girls. We have publicly apologised wholeheartedly to the victims and offered our thanks for them for sharing their experiences with the inquiry. So that's great. They've offered their thanks to you for sharing your experience that went on for 10 bloody years in this evil dump of a town.
Well, it's frankly outrageous to me that they continue to refuse to accept responsibility for their failings. In the report, in the Crowther report into CSE in Telford, it was stated in no uncertain terms that progress had been unconscionably slow in Telford in implementing the recommendations of years of investigation into CSE. It's also been stated that the council was defensive and that they seemed unwilling to accept criticism, and that they had spent, they gave 1.2 million documents, pages of documents to the inquiry to sift through. It felt very much like burying them in evidence to try.
That's the classic thing. When you don't actually want to do anything, you just do a massive document dump. It
feels like a bad court show at times. And Telford and Wrekin Council, West Mercia Police, they spent years ignoring a problem that very much did not go away and still hasn't gone away. And now they like to pretend as though mistakes have been made and lessons have been learned, when the report stated in no uncertain terms that there's still systemic issues with tackling CSE in towns like Telford.
No, I can't get over it, because, as I said, it's like years and years ago now that I first met those first victims in Rotherham. Rotherham should have been the one town, and once that was on the front pages, this thing should have ended. And because of lousy councils, what's it called? Telford and Wrekin?
Telford and Wrekin Council. Telford
and Wrekin Council. You're right. We need to do more naming and shaming, and maybe we'll go through them all until this bloody disgrace that shames England stops. Thank you very much, Samantha. Samantha is incredible. If you knew 10% of what she's been through, you would be horrified that she's together enough to be sitting here and talking about baronesses who get kicked out of the cabinet. It would have finished anybody else off, and she's sticking with this thing very fiercely. This is a disgrace. We need to do something about it. That is, let's stump. We got time for one stump. Oh, Al says, Mark, it's been a while on this subject, but how do you think the Ginger Growler is coming to terms with Liz Truss as the new PM? Well, I happen to have the Ginger Growler here with me in the studio. Hello, Ginger Growler. What do you think of Liz Truss as PM? Oh, she's what's that? Oh, give me a bottle of gear. Ah, the old Ventac. That's going to do it. Dan Wootton is here to wallop you Wednesday. What you got, Dan?
It's in the old days, in my way. Impressive woman, isn't she? I love it every time she is on your show. Absolutely powerful stuff. Lots coming up today, Mark. Andrew Doyle is here, actually. Obviously, you know him as the host of Headliners, but he has written a brilliant new book called The New Puritans, and he explains why he thinks the high priests of cancel culture are now on a par with the folk behind the Salem witch trials in the 17th century. So it's a fascinating thesis. He'll get into it tonight. Rod Liddle is going to unveil a dramatic 10-point plan for Liz Truss to save broken Britain. I can only imagine what some of those points are, Mark. And Brendan O'Neill on Meghan Markle, plus our woke slayer-in-chief, Jim Davidson, is coming for the BBC tonight, so they should be very scared.
Oh, I love to see that. I'm going to read that book because we are moving into a world without jokes, which used to be the sort of thing we left to the other side of the Iron Curtain, and now it's here. That's all coming up with the one and only Dan Wootton, all after the weather. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest forecast from the Met Office. Over the next few days we'll see a mixture of sunny spells, scattered heavy and thundery showers, and particularly warm overnight as well. The reason for the unsettled weather at the moment is this area of low pressure. It has been with us most of the week and it isn't going anywhere quickly, remaining unsettled for many of us. And if we take a look at the details for the rest of Wednesday, we can see frequent showers blowing in across the south and the west, closest to the centre of that low pressure system. Overnight though, showers for most areas, perhaps some drier interludes across northern England, southern Scotland, but overall a warm night to come. Temperatures double figures for many, 12 to 15 Celsius. So a muggy start to Thursday morning. Some really heavy showers developing through the central belt of Scotland first thing. A Met Office warning in force here. Elsewhere, a mixture of sunny spells and scattered heavy showers as we go through the day. Some rumbles of thunder, hail in there, some disruption to travel is expected. And then temperature-wise, generally warm for the early part of September, low 20s for many, 22 to 23 Celsius across the southeast of England. Through Thursday afternoon and into the evening time, we're just going to have to watch this area of heavy rain moving in off the North Sea, affecting parts of northern England, southern Scotland. This pushing its way westwards overnight. Elsewhere during the early hours into Friday morning, we'll see a mixture of clear spells and still the risk of some scattered showers. Generally warm night, again temperatures 13 to 15 Celsius in the towns and cities, perhaps dipping into single figures in the countryside. So we've got this area of cloud and outbreaks of rain swirling around the northwest of the UK through Friday. It should start to ease later on in the day, but still the risk across eastern Scotland, some heavy downpours here. Elsewhere, another day of sunny spells and scattered showers, some of these heavy and thundery. Perhaps drier as we head into the weekend initially before further rain arrives later, and overall temperatures still reaching the low 20s.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales,